ready to jump in and sew this super fast and simple quilt pattern with me. All you need is a couple of fat quarters, and I'm going to show you where you can find the free pattern, and we'll sew it together start to finish. So let's take a look. Hey guys, welcome back to my sewing room. I'm Kelly and you found me here on Pick and Stitches, and today we're going to be working on this block. This is a free pattern from the Fat Quarter shop. It's called Fat Quarter Flowers. I'll put the link in the description. You guys can click that, get the full PDF. You'll have all of these printouts to reference. It's got something as small as a crib all the way up to a queen size. So we're going to be making kind of this mid-size today, and I hope you'll stay along with me and I can show you all the steps. So let's hop right on in. Okay guys, so the first thing I'm going to do is take my fat quarter and I'm going to kind of square up one side. The beautiful thing about using these half square triangles is things do not have to be perfect. They just need to be close. You need to have enough fabric there to cover whatever the triangle size is. Now of course you don't want to be wasteful, but it is nice that you don't have to be as precise on this piece of your cutting. So we're going to get 2 out of every fat quarter. And then we're going to have a little bit left over. I'm kind of thinking I might see a scrappy binding in my future. I don't know. We're going to see if we run out of time, because it certainly takes a little bit more time, but I think that is probably going to be a great use for this offcut. And then it will match the quilt and I won't have to go to the store. So, you know, all those things. Okay, so we go through our entire stack of 10 fat quarters and we would put one together with the white fabric. So see, I haven't cut the fat quarter down to size. My white fabric is exactly the 16.5 by 8. Okay, so the other piece that we're going to need for each set of triangles is our half square triangles. You can use triangles on a roll or any other method that you like to make triangles or make half square triangles. I really like this method. So again, I always like to keep this piece because it has all of the important information. It shows me that the 7.5 unfinished, 7 finished, and then it also has the SKU number if I need to reorder some more. So I'm just going to open it up, and each fat quarter cut is going to need 2 pieces of a square. So we'll grab our ruler and we'll just cut that down. You want to cut right on that line because again, that's one of our outside edges. And we're just going to go through our entire stack. So again, that's fabric with the right sides together. And then I'm just going to pin that on. And once I have all of my fat quarters cut and all of my triangles pinned on, then we'll go over to the machine and we'll have a relay race on the sewing machine. Okay, and while we're over here, I really do think I am going to use these as my binding strips. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut these down to 2.5 inch length because it will be easy to do right now. Now as we go to the machine to sew these, you can see there are arrows. So it says exactly what you need to do. Following the arrows, sew on the dashed lines using a 1.5 stitch length. I usually use with like a 1.25. So you would start here, come to the corner, then come all the way down here. So you're going to have to break your thread here. It's not quite as easy as some of our smaller ones. But on this path, you can totally sew up this line, stop, pivot, and continue on. I generally don't take the time to stop and pivot and end on an exact thing because if you just sew right off this line, you're going to cut that off anyways. And so for me, I go pedal to the metal, start here and sew off, start here and sew off. But you are welcome to do it any way that makes you happy. Hey guys, now we've got all of our fabrics connected with their background fabric and their triangles on a roll. And again, if you really look at these closely, you can see there are arrows, and if you want to follow the lines, you could totally do that and pivot and you won't have to break thread. But I prefer to just sew parallel lines. So that is the way I choose to do it, but you do it any way that works for you. So we're going to drop our stitch length I like to get quite small. It's impossible to pick them out, so just make sure you're where you want to be, and off we go. Okay guys, here is a perfect example of kind of spontaneous oiling. It doesn't sound bad, but I feel like I can kind of hear my machine a little bit differently. So I'm just going to give a little bit of oil to her so I can keep her in good working order. I rearranged my stuff trying to, get organized, and it turns out it's given me a harder time. So I'm just going to give it one drop in each of its spots. But when I'm running these paper triangles, I put pedal to the metal. I'm running 1,500 stitches every time. So it's probably the one time if it sewed faster, I would go faster. All right, that's all 4. Okay. All right, so we are all sewn together. Now we've got a lot of cutting to do. Okay, now we're going to just cut all these down to size. And again, this is where I like to use this combination of my rotary cutter that I can use in either hand, right or left-handed. And the first thing we're going to do is just cut these long sides. I'm going to get right on our line and cut it all the way down on both sides. And somebody asked me the other day, this is probably my favorite ruler. If you only had one, this is the one I would get. But I do like to use a shorter ruler when I don't need something that wide, just because it's easier to manage. So the first one I was using was a 6.5 by 24. This is a 6.5 by 12.5. Actually, I think that's 24.5. But that is totally a personal preference. I went a really long time without this particular ruler, but I do end up reaching for it a lot because it's just smaller and it's easier to deal with. So now we're going to cut these squares apart. And I'm going to put this in my scrap bin and see if I can incorporate it into our scrappy binding. Make a pile over there for that. And then we just cut our half square triangles apart. And I'll make a big stack of these. You know what, if I cut this end off, it's going to leave me with a longer scrap, so I'm going to do this one first, which is usually not my normal MO, but it's what we're going to do for this particular project. And you can use this longer ruler. It just kind of pushes my body back, so I'm a little further from what I'm working on, but it is absolutely doable. Okay guys, and since we have so very many of these triangles, and because I'm cutting this next diagonal seam is inside of 2 seams already, I'm going to live a little bit dangerously. I'm going to go ahead and stack 2 at a time. Now definitely make sure that your lines aren't going opposite directions, but I'm just going to stack them up because these are my half square triangles. They've got a lot more precision, and so I'm just going to cut them apart. And then I will pull these apart immediately and make sure that I didn't make the biggest mistake. Probably shouldn't do it on one of my favorite prints. But it's too late now. All right, let's see. And on these, when you go to take them off, I just like to fold them so that they're really perforated and they just rip right off. All right, let's take a peek. I've got plenty of seam on that one. And I find if you hold it where it starts, that usually makes it go ahead and rip a little easier, and so you're not just pulling on that seam. Since there's so much bias going on, I always hesitate to do anything that's going to stretch that fabric. Because this is a big old triangle. This one wants to be difficult. I think this is where I ran out of bobbin thread and I had to sew over the same section a little bit. Okay. So yeah, it looks like I have enough seams on all 4 of these, so going forward that is probably the way I'm going to do it. I know it's only going to save me 1 cut per block, but that's 1 cut per block. That's 20 cuts right there. Okay. Now we're just going to roll through and iron all our half square triangles open. First I'm going to set the seams, and then we will press them to the dark side. And if you are new to pressing, if you want to press towards a seam, towards the dark side, if you'll put the dark side on top, what that means is when you press your seam open, and then you look on the back, the fabric has moved towards the dark side. If we had pressed this towards the light side, you might see it through the light side. That's why you almost always are going to press to the dark side if you're only pressing one direction. So this is going to take a hot minute, but we'll get there. Okay guys, I think I found a seam that I forgot to run my finger over before I cut it off. So this is what happens if you trim your blocks from your triangle paper and you forgot to sew a seam. So we'll have to go sew that one back on. I'll just be really careful because that's all bias. Okay, so now we're just going to trim off these little dog ears or rabbit ears, whatever you want to call them. I do like to try to keep my blocks organized in the same direction, and I'm going to try to keep my center pinwheels to be the same color. So my secondary block that forms is not going to stay the same color. Maybe I think that's going to be too much Tetris to try to make all those match up, but I am going to try to keep my basic block colors together. Okay, so now you're going to take all your blocks and double check, make sure you should have 7.5 by 7.5. This is a 7.5 inch ruler. You don't have to have it, but it sure is nice if you happen to have one that's the right size for your blocks. Now this is going to be making this kind of star pinwheel effect. So I highly suggest as you're getting ready to cut, you look at this picture and you orient your triangles the same way. Now see how my diagonal line on my ruler is going this way, so I have a tendency to line up my fabric that way, but that will not match the pattern. And so in order to keep myself from getting confused, I'm going to make my fabric face the same direction, so my big color wave is on the bottom and then on the left hand side. So I'm going to do that all the time so that I know I can follow this pattern. Otherwise you're going to end up with some spinning one way and some spinning the other way, which again is not the end of the world, but it's probably not what you want. So we're going to take our ruler, and if you happen to have this 7.5-inch ruler, you can see, let's see, maybe I can get you a solid background. So here you've got this white line that's the center of this ruler. So even though it's 7.5, that kind of helps if there's weird, odd colors. And you all see that? So that helps you get the center of it. Since it's 7.5, you want 3 3/4, and that just makes it a little easier to get to. So again, I'm going to double check, make sure that I'm oriented the same way. In fact, I'm going to take this whole pile back here and I'm going to turn it the correct way. And all we're going to do is, if you have a 7.5-inch ruler, you're going to line it up with the white line. So I'm starting with my 1/2-inch increments and I'm getting to this white line. If you don't, you're just going to cut it off at 3 3/4. And then I'm going to make 2 piles. I'm going to make a pile for my shorts and a pile for my talls. And I'm going to go through, to start, I'm just going to do 4 of these. And I'm going to make my test block, right? Because it's always a good idea to make a test block. Make sure that you like your seam allowances. I've tried out new presser feet before, and all of a sudden things are just different. And I thought I loved it, but then the block doesn't turn out right. So certainly if you've got new equipment or this is a new pattern for you, I would test it. Okay, so we're just going to go through our whole pile after you've done your test block, and you're just going to do them all. And I've already made a test block, so I'm just going to fast forward here for you guys and get everything cut. Okay guys, so here again we have our 2 stacks. So this would have been a complete triangle. And I really do want you to look back at your pattern because it would be really easy to flip-flop this. So I'm going to take my big stack and I'm going to move it over to the right. So it's reverse of how it would have been when you cut it. And then I'm going to take these guys, because I don't want to sew them onto their matching partner, and I'm just going to pop them to the bottom of my stack. And I'm just going to try to kind of keep things balanced as I go through. And I'm just going to chain piece all of these. So I do highly suggest that you do 1 block first, just to make sure that you know the process and that you like how it's coming together. But we're just going to show it with a quick 1/4-inch seam. I did try, I'm leaving probably closer to a scant 1/4. Just, that's kind of my typical MO, and that's what I'm doing here. We're going to go ahead and cut them all apart. I just used this little tool, and then we're going to set our seams, and we're going to want to press towards the smaller triangle. So again, if you'll just put that smallest triangle on top, then as you press, your seam will automatically go towards that triangle or that side. And then we're going to head back to the cutting table and trim these guys up. Okay, when I started off pressing, I did keep these all together. It was kind of easy to have them in these 4 batches. So now I'm just going to cut them apart and keep my 4 long colors in a stack together. So the next step is we are going to trim up these blocks. Now I want to make sure that I'm leaving a 1/4 inch on the top of my point, but it shows in the illustration that we're going to trim off the bottom of the block. So I just like to double check that, make sure that it's set correctly. And then I'm just going to line this up with my 7-inch line and trim the bottom. I think I already trimmed this one. Okay, so I'm going to double check this one, make sure I've got a 1/4 inch. I'm going to kind of square this one up because we are going to take a little bit off the bottom, so we've got some room to work with, because these were 7.5 and then we added a seam here, but we didn't change their length, so that's part of why we're having to make this adjustment. Okay guys, so we've got all of our little wick blocks and we are going to work at getting them together into this shape. Now I decided that I was going to keep all 4 of my center star pieces the same color. I did start to put one together that was really scrappy and I bet that would look cute too, but I just didn't have the vision for the scope of it. And maybe if I had all of these finished and threw them up on the design wall, I might feel a little bit differently. But I think I like the scrappy outer corners, and then this inner corner is going to be the same. And I want to just encourage you to go back to your directions. So now we're onto this page. We've cut and everything down to the 7x7. And now we're going to put it on our design board. And we will probably just chain piece these once we get going. But our first piece is going to go Little Mountain, Big Mountain. That's what I'm going to call them. And then we're going to take that same pattern, and just like you would with a pinwheel, we're going to rotate it 1. Okay? So Little Mountain, Big Mountain, rotate 1. This is in position 2. So 1, 2. And then this one's going to be in position 1, 2, 3. And that gives us our pattern. So I'm just going to stack these right back up. And the way I like to think of it on my little tabletop here is I just take the first piece and I look at my pattern and I'm just going to make this block across. So I'm going to take my first piece straight up and down, my second piece right left with the little mountain at the top, little mountain on the left, and then I'm going to chain piece it. And so if I do 2 of those, they will match up together and make a star. I hope that's clear. I'm sorry if this is redundant or remedial, but I know when I was first starting out, just a little explanation probably would have helped keep me from dulling my seam ripper so quickly. So off we go. And again, I have all of these exactly oriented the same way. If you had them in here crisscrossed, it would be really easy to get confused on what direction you wanted it to face. And I put them up exactly like they are, and then just rotate this one 15 minutes on the clock. Pressing station, and we're going to press so that the seam follows this longest section of our mountain. So we're going to press towards this side. So we're going to set our seams and we're going to press with this long side of the mountain seam on the top. And then that way our 2 sections will nest with each other. we have a bunch of rectangular pieces that look like this, or like this, or like this. So you're going to take 2 of those rectangular pieces and you're going to place them with the main body color together. So these 2 seams will nest, and I'm going to really make sure that those match up well, and we're just going to sew all of our stars together. I'll probably just throw a pin on that since it's nesting so well, just to hold the one spot. We're going to go press them open. Okay guys, so now I've got my whole quilt laid out on this design wall. I did go ahead and make a couple of specific blocks so that my bow ties would match. This fabric ended up being really scrappy. It was one of the ones that came out of a pre-cut box a couple months ago. I decided to make my center stars all solid to help with that, but then I ended up making a couple of custom blocks where I really planned where they were going to go. If I was going to make this again, I might only make it in a couple of colors so that it's a lot easier to just make it totally scrappy start to finish. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this top row and I'm going to sew it all together. Okay, so the way I like to pick these up if I'm going to do that is I just start on the left hand side and I keep it on the top and I go all the way across. And then I'm going to bring it straight over to my sewing machine just like this and set it down. Okay, so I kept everything right here in the same exact orientation, so I know this is going to be my upper left-hand block, and this is exactly the way it's going to be oriented. And I'm going to take my upper right hand, next one over. Now these aren't exactly matching. I had a couple that I just gave up on, but I'm going to line up those 2 seams, and because of the way we've pressed these blocks, they should nest, and I'm going to sew down that row. I'm going to break thread and fold it open, and then I know that my piece, in fact, let me see if I can make room for it over here for you guys. This is, whoops, almost knocked that off the table. This is my other side. So that's going to match this one. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that over, nest the seam, fold it together. And then once I get this whole row done, I'll probably press this whole row to the right and then the next row to the left. So that my rows will nest when I go to connect them. And I'll fold that open. So I know I have my pink, gonna align with this pink. And on my design wall, I did orient my quilt the other way just to make it easier. So there's 4 rows instead of 5. It's just length the other direction. It shouldn't make too much difference to you though. Okay, now this block, because we pressed that center seam open, is not going to nest, and that's okay. I'm just going to make sure that I get it lined up really well. And if you need to, you can always poke a pen to make sure that those seams are lining up exactly. If you didn't have to worry about the color placement as much, you wouldn't have had to rotate that block, so it could have nested a little easier. Okay, I'm just going to take a peek back at it because that is one that didn't nest. I want to make sure it looks good, and now I'll just take it over to the ironing board. I'm going to iron this one to the right, and then I'll iron the next one to the left. Okay, so I've picked up row 2 in the exact same fashion. So this is my upper left, and this is the next one over on row 2. I'm going to see, hopefully these seams, looks like these are both a press open, so I'm just going to line them up and sew it together. Okay, so now I have this row and all my rows are sewn together, and now I'm just going to connect the first and second, and I'm going to connect the second and the third. So I'm just going to make sure that my bow ties line up really nicely. I'm going to pin right there, and then I'm going to sew this group together and this group, and then we'll finish by sewing the last 2 segments. This is row 1 and row 2. So I'm testing out this 60 weight glide polyester thread on this quilt, and sometimes when I run my finger over it, it feels like maybe I'm out of bobbin thread and it's not stitching, but it is. It's just a thin thread. Okay, so I'm going to press all of my seams down between the rows. Okay, so now we're going to sew our next 2 rows together, and then we'll have our 2 sections, and we are done with this quilt top. Okay guys, that wraps up our fat quarter flowers quilt. I think it turned out beautifully. Again, if you want your bow ties to match, you probably are going to have to do a little bit more planning. I think it would be really fun as a scrappy quilt if you just had maybe 2 color wheels to play with, but I just had so many colors going on, it was too much. I hope you enjoyed sewing this along with me. I wanted to pick something that was a free pattern where I didn't have to keep the measurements back and I could share with you every single detail, and I hope that helps. If you enjoy watching these tutorials or any of my unboxing videos, it would help me out a ton if you would like and subscribe to the channel. And until then, guys, I will see you guys next time.